The morning sun burned off the thin veil of fog that clung to the motor pool, revealing row after row of olive-drab vehicles parked in perfect alignment. The metallic smell of engine oil hung in the air, mixing with a faint tang of dust. Boots scuffed against the concrete, voices carried in low banter, and the rhythmic clank of tools from the maintenance bays punctuated the hum of a typical day on base. Then came the bark. "Line it up, people. Let's see if anyone here still remembers what discipline looks like." Captain Jax Holden's voice was a whip crack across the yard, and every soldier within earshot stiffened. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform immaculate, his boots polished to a mirror finish. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but the curl of his mouth carried its own brand of disdain. Staff Sergeant Eva Raines kept her gaze forward, standing beside the driver's door of her assigned up-armored SUV. She'd already triple-checked the fluids, the tires, the comms. Everything was squared away. Holden stalked down the line like a man inspecting livestock, pausing at each vehicle to glare at the driver or point out some imagined flaw. The soldiers he passed shifted uneasily, offering quick yes, sir, responses to his clipped comments. When he reached her, his shadow stretched across the hood of her SUV. "Raines." His tone was flat, but there was that glint, like he'd found a favorite target. "Tell me, what exactly is your job here? You polish these wheels for the general, make sure his coffee's hot, maybe drive him to the PX when he needs fresh socks." A few nearby soldiers chuckled, trying not to be obvious about it. Eva kept her stance rigid. "I drive where I'm ordered, sir, safely and on time." Holden tilted his head, stepping closer, his voice lowering just enough for the surrounding troops to lean in. "Right, you're the chauffeur with stripes. Nothing more dangerous than a turn signal in your world, huh?" More snickers. She forced her jaw to unclench. "With respect, sir, I've driven convoys through." "Through what?" "Rush hour traffic." His voice rose enough to draw more onlookers from the maintenance bays. "Let me guess, you're also a tactical expert now." He jerked his chin toward the map, stand at the far end of the row. "All right, Sergeant Chauffeur. Show me. The General's transport tomorrow, 5-vehicle convoy, routes marked. Enemy activity's been spotted near the outskirts. Tell us all what you would do." The soldiers around them parted, a ripple of anticipation in their eyes. Holden was about to eat someone alive. Eva walked to the map stand, her boots loud on the concrete. The laminated sheet was covered in color-coded lines and notations. She studied it for all of 3 seconds before pointing to a side road cutting south before the main junction. "I'd take this route instead. Avoids a choke point at the overpass. Gives us 2 extra minutes to adjust if—" Holden's laugh was sharp and ugly. "That's cute. The civilian bypass. Did you read that in some base safety manual?" Her eyes narrowed. "Sir, the overpass is the most obvious ambush location. Its boxed invisibility is low and that," Holden said, his voice dripping with mockery, "is why you'll never be in charge of anything that requires actual combat thinking. You want to sneak the general through the back roads like a soccer mom avoiding traffic lights. This is a Sunday drive." A low murmur ran through the small crowd. Eva felt heat rise in her chest, the kind that made her fingers curl into fists. She swallowed it back. "With respect, sir, if the goal is to keep him alive, my plan—" "Your plan," Holden interrupted, stepping into her space until his sunglasses reflected her own hard stare back at her, "is irrelevant. You're here to drive where you're told when you're told, and to shut your mouth while doing it." The humiliation hit like a slap, the watching faces sharpening into a blur. She caught sight of Private Mills smirking at her from back, and Sergeant Dunn whispering something to the guy beside him. Holden turned to the group, sweeping an arm toward her. "Let this be a lesson. There's a difference between following orders and playing pretend soldier. Know your lane." The laughter wasn't loud, but was enough to scrape across her pride like sandpaper. Eva's hands were still at her sides, fingers twitching from the effort it took not to snap back at him. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She wanted to tell him about the time she'd driven through RPG fire, about the bodies she dragged from overturned Humvees, about the smell of burning rubber and blood in the same breath. But those weren't stories she was allowed to tell. Not here, not to him. She stepped back on the map, jaw tight, and started toward her SUV. That's when an approaching vehicle cut through the air. A black SUV, glossy in the sunlight, rolling into the motor pool like it owned the ground it touched. It stopped just short of the lineup, its windows tinted dark. Two men stepped out. Both wore suits, their posture loose but alert. No insignia, no unit patches. Civilians, but the kind that didn't belong to any civilian world she knew. The taller one, broad and square-jawed, scanned the yard with calm precision. The other, leaner and sharp-eyed, carried a leather folder. Conversations around the yard faltered. Even Holden's smirk dimmed a shade. The taller man's gaze landed on Eva almost immediately. He murmured something to his partner. Then they crossed the yard without hesitation, heading straight for her. Holden stepped forward, intercepting. "This is a restricted area. State your business." The lean man flipped open a wallet. Credentials flashed, quick enough to show the seal, without giving Holden time to process. "We're here for Staff Sergeant Eva Raines." Holden blinked, his tone sharpening. "She's assigned to motor pool duty." "We're aware," the taller one said. His voice was calm, final. "We need her. Now." A ripple of whispers swept through the onlookers. Holden's brow furrowed, his jaw working, but he stepped aside, the muscles in his neck tight. Eva glanced between them, her own voice steady despite the sudden pounding in her chest. "May I ask what this is about?" The taller man didn't smile, didn't blink. "Let's just say you've been on our radar. Time-sensitive matter. Bring your go bag." Holden scoffed under his breath. Must be a slow day at the agency if they're recruiting drivers. The lean man's eyes flicked to Holden, cold enough to frost steel. Not just any driver. The words hung in the air like a drawn blade. Eva felt every stare on her as she walked to her SUV. Her humiliation was still there, raw and burning, but now it was tangled with something else. Something sharper. She slung her bag over her shoulder and followed the two men toward the waiting black SUV. The taller one held the door open, and for a moment, she glanced back at the motor pool. Holden was watching her, arms crossed, his smirk replaced by something harder to read. The engine rumbled to life as she stepped inside, the door closing with a weighty thunk. The black SUV rolled out of the motor pool, sunlight flashing off the tinted glass, leaving Holden and the rest of the yard behind. Inside, the taller man finally introduced himself. "Mason Trent, CIA. This is Agent Lila Chen. We got a situation, and you're the one we need." Her eyes narrowed. "And what exactly is it you think I can do for the CIA?" Mason's gaze met hers in the rear-view mirror. Drive, fast, and survive doing it. The SUV sped up, and the bass faded in the distance. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The hum of the black SUV's engine was steady, almost hypnotic, as it carried Eva away from the motor pool and the way to Holden's smirk. But the quiet inside the cabin wasn't comfortable. It was a sharp-edged kind, heavy with unspoken things. Mason Trent sat in the passenger seat, broad shoulders filling the space. His posture was relaxed, but Eva could feel his eyes on her through the angled side mirror, studying her as if cataloging every movement. In the driver's seat, Agent Lila Chen's hands were precise on the wheel, each turn smooth, each acceleration calculated. The air smelled faintly of leather and something antiseptic, the kind of cleanliness that wasn't for comfort, but for control. Eva finally broke the silence. "You gonna tell me what this is about, or am I supposed to sit here and enjoy the mystery?" Mason didn't turn around. "We've been tracking certain skill sets in active service. Yours came up more than once." She snorted softly. "Skill sets? I drive." "You survive," he corrected, still not facing her. "And you improvise in situations that don't leave room for hesitation. That's rarer than you think." Lila glanced at him, a flicker of a smirk at the corner of her mouth. "Most people freeze when the plan blows up. You adapt." Eva leaned back, arms crossed. "And this has what to do with the CIA." Mason finally turned, resting one arm over the seat back. His eyes were cool, assessing. "We've got a situation. Hostile territory, zero margin for error. We need someone who can move a high-value asset through that territory in one piece." You've got plenty of trained field operatives for that. Not like you, Mason said simply. Your record's unconventional. There's a reason you weren't in the motor pool by accident. Her jaw tightened. My CO doesn't seem to think I'm worth much more than delivering coffee. Your CO, Mason said, isn't paid to think outside the chain of command. We are. The SUV slowed as Lila turned onto a road Eva didn't recognize. They passed through a nondescript gate guarded by men in plain clothes. No salutes. No bay signage. Inside, low concrete buildings stretched out in neat rows, the kind of place that existed by pretending it didn't. When they stopped, Mason gestured for her to get out. The air outside was cooler, carrying the faint scent of ozone after a recent rain. This way. They led her into one of the buildings, down a hallway lined with blank steel doors. Mason stopped at one and keyed in a code. The door hissed open, revealing a sparse briefing room. Table, chairs, wall-mounted screen, and nothing else. Lila closed the door behind them, and Mason dropped a thick dossier onto the table. It landed with a heavy thunk. Eva stayed standing. What's in it? Mason opened it and turned it toward her. Satellite photos, grainy night vision shots, and maps peppered with red markings filled the pages. But her eyes snagged on one particular image, her own face, circled in red ink. Her throat tightened. What the hell is this? You've been under observation for the last 8 months, Mason said without flinching. We flagged you after a convoy incident in Kandahar. Yes, we know you were just the driver. We also know you rerouted under fire, saved a load of ammunition from being taken, and got 5 soldiers out alive. None of that made the official report. Her fingers curled against the table edge. So you've been watching me? We've been looking for people like you, Lila said, leaning against the wall. The kind who can make decisions no one else sees until it's too late. Eva exhaled slowly, forcing the tension out of her voice. And what's the situation? Mason tapped a satellite image showing a cluster of buildings in what looked like a half-ruined city. Eastern Europe. Our asset is a scientist with sensitive intel on a bioweapons program. He's agreed to defect. Trouble is, the territory between him and our extraction point is crawling with militia groups and rogue military elements. They know we're coming. They don't know who's driving. She stared at the map. Why me? Because, Mason said, you don't drive like a soldier. You drive like someone who refuses to die. The bluntness in his voice left no room for posturing. Lila crossed the room, sliding another photo toward her. This one a grainy image of a narrow alley choked with debris and smoke. Our people can fight, but they can't all get behind a wheel and make it through something like this at 70 miles an hour without losing their heads. We've run simulations. We've run the math. You're the variable that works. Eva looked down at the images again, her stomach tightening. The scientist's face was blurred, but the streets, the fire, the damage, they weren't just obstacles. They were killing grounds. And if I say no, she asked quietly. Mason shrugged. Then you go back to polishing SUV for officers who think your worth ends at the ignition switch. But understand this. Someone else will take the job. And I don't trust their survival odds. She hated that it was working. The slow, deliberate pressure. They weren't begging. They were giving her a choice that didn't feel like a choice at all. Lila slid a small black pouch onto the table. You'll leave within 48 hours. We'll run you through a field evaluation first. Gear up. Eva glanced at the pouch but didn't open it. You're assuming I've agreed. Mason smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. You will. The next hours were a blur of paperwork she wasn't allowed to read fully before signing medical checks, and a gear issue session where everything was matte black, stripped of any identifying marks. The pouch Lila had given her contained a compact comm unit, an encrypted GPS, and a sidearm. It wasn't until she was alone in a stark dorm room that the day's events caught up to her. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, fingers gripping the pouch, Holden's voice replaying in her head. Know your lane. She thought about his smirk, about the soldiers' laughter, about the way her humiliation had burned hotter than anger. And then she thought about that satellite photo, the blurred face of scientist, the red circle around hers. She set the pouch down and pulled the comm unit into her hands. It was cold, smooth, heavier than it looked. She turned it over once, twice, then set it beside her on the bed. Her pulse had steadied. The humiliation was still there, but it wasn't raw anymore. It was sharp, focused. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," she said. Lila stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. "We start your evaluation at 0600. It won't be easy." Eva met her eyes. "I wouldn't have agreed if I thought it would be." Lila's smile was quick, almost approving. "Good, because if you pass, we'll be wheels up before you can second-guess it." When the door closed again, Eva lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The air in the room was still silent, but her mind was already moving at 70 miles an hour, mapping out roads she hadn't seen yet, calculating risks she hadn't taken yet. This wasn't just about the CIA. It wasn't even just about the mission. It was about never giving Holden or anyone else the satisfaction of being right about her. Tomorrow, she'd prove it, and the day after that, she'd drive into hell if she had to. The dawn was gray and cold, the kind of light that seemed to flatten the world into shades of steel. A low mist clung to the training compound, muting sound and making the rows of abandoned buildings look like ghosts in the distance. Eva stood in the middle of a cracked asphalt lot, hands shoved into the pockets of her black cargo pants, waiting. She could feel the damp bite through her jacket, the air smelling faintly of diesel and metal. She wasn't alone. 10 other people stood scattered across the lot. Men and women in the same stripped-down black kit, all of them radiating a quiet readiness. They didn't talk. They didn't smile. Their eyes flicked over her briefly, then dismissed her. Footsteps approached from behind. Mason Trent came into view, his expression unreadable, a clipboard in one hand. "Morning, Raines," he said, like they'd met here for coffee instead of whatever this was. "Hope you got some sleep." Eva gave him a flat look. "I'm guessing I'll need it." "That's the idea." He glanced down at the clipboard, then back up at the group. "All right, listen up. This is a live environment driving evaluation. No pre-brief on route or hazards. Your only objective is to get from point A to point B alive. There will be pursuit. There will be obstacles. There will be live fire." A ripple of focus moved through the group, but no one spoke. Mason's gaze landed on her again. "You're not competing against each other. You're competing against the clock and against your own mistakes. Fall behind, fail to adapt, or get hit, and you're done." "Understood." A low chorus of yes murmured back. Lila Chin stepped forward from the sidelines, holding a set of keys. "Vehicles are staged at the far end. You'll get one chance." Eva took the keys without hesitation. They were cold in her palm. She walked toward the line of matte black SUVs and pickups parked nose out, her boots crunching against the gravel. She picked the second SUV in the line, sliding into the driver's seat. The interior was stripped, no luxury, just utility. The radio crackled. Mason's voice came through, low and clipped. "Go." She slammed the engine to life and hit the accelerator. The tires bit into the gravel and spat it backward as she tore out of the lot and onto a narrow stretch of road between gutted warehouses. The fog swirled in her wake, and for a moment, she could almost imagine this was just another convoy run. Then the first gunshots cracked in the distance. She caught movement in the rearview mirror, 2 pursuit vehicles, closing fast. Their headlights cut through the mist like predators' eyes. Eva's grip tightened on the wheel. She took the first corner hard, the SUV tilting just enough to make her stomach shift. She didn't slow. More gunfire, louder now, closer. A side mirror shattered. Glass sprang against the door. "All right," she muttered to herself. "You want to play?" She yanked the wheel and cut down a side alley so narrow she could feel the scrape of brick against the SUV side panels. The pursuing vehicles overshot the turn. In the brief second she bought herself, she gunned the accelerator again, bouncing over potholes and debris. The alley spat her out onto a wider road, but this one was worse. Abandoned cars, burned-out shells, and chunks of concrete littered the way forward. She zigzagged, her reflexes snapping between micro-adjustments. The radio crackled again, Lila's voice this time. "Blockade ahead in 50 meters." She spotted it, a wall of steel barrels stacked too deep, with a narrow pedestrian gap in the middle. No way she'd fit through without clipping. She shifted down and spun the wheel, sideswiping a half-burned sedan to shove it into the barrels. They clanged apart just enough for her to force the SUV through with a shriek of metal against metal. The smell of scorched rubber filled the cabin. In the mirror, one of the pursuit vehicles tried the same move and failed. Its front end crumpled, stopping it dead. The other made it through, tires screaming. The course twisted to the ruined compound, each turn revealing a new nightmare. Spike strips flung across the asphalt, sudden drops where the pavement had caved, narrow bridges over skeletal ravines. She threaded the SUV through it all, breath steady, mind running 2 corners ahead. Halfway through, a figure stepped into the road ahead, firing an automatic rifle. Bullets punched into the hood, spiderwebbing the windshield. Eva ducked low, then jerked the wheel, clipping the edge of a derelict bus to shield her from the gunfire. Sparks skittered across the metal. The rifleman dove out of the way as she blasted past. Her pulse wasn't spiking anymore. It was leveling out, her body settling into that razor-edge calm she only felt when everything was trying to kill her. The pursuing SUV was still there, closing in again. She saw her opening, a collapsed wall spilling bricks across the street, with just enough gap for her to ramp the right tires. She hit it at speed, the SUV tilting, then slamming back down in a shower of debris. The pursuing vehicle tried it, but clipped too much of the wall, spinning out in a cloud of dust. She didn't look back again. The final stretch was a long, straight road toward a set of gates that loomed out of the mist. But something about it was wrong. It was too clean, too empty. Her instincts screamed. She slammed the brakes, the SUV screeching to a halt just in time for a line of simulated IED charges to detonate ahead of her in bright orange bursts. Smoke billowed, the smell of gunpowder rushing into the cabin. She didn't wait for the air to clear. Instead, she wrenched the wheel and plowed through a side fence, the SUV's reinforced bumper tearing it open. She barreled across a stretch of muddy ground, feeling the tires fight for grip, before bursting back onto the road past the blast zone. The gates were 50 meters ahead. She floored it, the engine roaring. She crossed the line with the tires still spinning mud, the SUV skidding to a stop just inside the compound. Silence, just her breathing and the ticking of the cooling engine. Mason stepped out from behind a stack of barriers, hands in his pockets. Lila emerged from another angle, holding a stopwatch. Eva climbed out, boots hitting the ground hard. Her heart was steady now, like she'd never left second gear. Mason studied her for a long moment. 2 minutes faster than our top operative's last run. One of the other candidates rolled in behind her, slower, with smoke trailing from their engine. Others didn't make it back at all. Lila's gaze met hers, unreadable but edged with approval. Not bad for a chauffeur. Eva let the corner of her mouth twitch upward. Guess I stayed in my lane. Mason didn't smile, but there was a weight in his voice when he said, "You're cleared for operational deployment." And just like that, the evaluation was over. But the real mission, whatever waited out there in that hostile city, was only just beginning. The air inside the transport plane was a cold, metallic breath, vibrating with the constant roar of engines. Every seat along the fuselage was occupied by black-clad operatives, some quietly checking their weapons, others sitting still with eyes closed, conserving focus. Eva sat between Mason and a weapons crate, the strap of her seatbelt cutting across her chest. The vibration in her bones was the same one she'd felt in convoys before a push into danger. But this time there was no convoy, no friendly territory, just her, a vehicle, and whatever waited beyond the drop point. Lila leaned across in the opposite row, her voice raised just enough to be heard over the engines. "We insert 30 clicks outside the city. You'll have 2 hours to reach the contact point before the enemy realizes he's gone dark. After that, every road becomes a kill zone." Mason added, "The scientist's building is here." He slid a photo across to her, grainy, taken from a drone. The building was a squat block of gray concrete, surrounded by burnout cars. You get in, we secure him. You get us out. No air support. Too visible. You'll have to drive him through the worst part of the city to the extraction zone. Eva studied the map in her lap. The streets were a snarl of red ink hazards, checkpoints, ambush zones, collapsed roads. The quickest route was suicide. The safest route was too slow. She was already calculating a third option. Any local support? She asked. Mason's expression was flat. You'll have one joint task force backup vehicle at the rendezvous. They've been in country for 3 weeks. That made her pause. Who's leading them? Before Mason could answer, a voice cut in from the rear of the plane. Captain Jax Holden. Heard you were tagging along. She turned slowly. There he was. Same square jaw, same self-satisfied smirk, but dressed in black combat gear instead of polished fatigues. His eyes met hers with a spark of something she couldn't place. Challenge, disbelief, maybe both. Not tagging along. Eva said evenly, driving point. Holden laughed under his breath. Guess they really are scraping the bottom of the barrel. Lila's eyes flicked between them, but she didn't intervene. The red light over the ramp blinked on. Mason's voice was firm. Gear up. The city smelled like ash and metal. They rolled in undercover at night in 2 black SUVs, headlights off, moving through the skeletal remains of apartment blocks. Shattered windows stared down like hollow eyes, and somewhere in the distance, a single dog barked, then fell silent. Eva gripped the wheel, the hum of the engine low beneath her seat. Mason sat beside her, rifle across his lap. Lila rode in the back, eyes scanning the alleys through night vision goggles. Holden's voice crackled over comms from the second vehicle. Half a click to the target building. Roads look clear. Eva's gut tightened. Too clear. She slowed, easing the SUV around a burned-out bus. The glow from a smoldering trash fire lit the street in a flicker of orange, casting shadows that moved just enough to suggest life. They reached the building without incident. Mason and Lila moved first, slipping inside with 2 other operatives. Eva stayed in the driver's seat, engine running, scanning the rooftops. A muffled exchange of shouts and gunfire erupted inside. 30 seconds later, Mason emerged with a limping man between him and Lila, the scientist. His face was pale, his right leg wrapped in a bloodied bandage. Go! Mason barked as they shoved him into the back. Eva dropped the SUV into gear, punching the accelerator. The tires squealed against the cracked asphalt. Behind them, Holden's vehicle followed close, his team firing at shadowy figures that spilled from side streets. Bullets pinged against the SUV's armor plating. Eva took a hard left, then cut through a narrow alley so tight she had to fold the side mirrors in with a quick slap of her palm. Sparks screamed as the SUV brushed concrete. Lila's voice was calm despite the gunfire. They're moving to block the main road ahead. Not taking the main road, Eva muttered. She swerved down a side street that looked like it dead-ended. At the last second, she spotted a half-collapsed ramp from a parking garage. Holden's voice came sharp over comms. Rains, that's a... But she was already hitting the ramp, the SUV bouncing violently as they climbed, then bursting onto the second floor of the garage. She punched through a flimsy barrier, sending shards of wood scattering into the night as they dropped back to street level on the far side. Death trap? Holden finished, his voice tinged with reluctant surprise. The scientist groaned in the back, clutching his leg. Lila pressed a hand against the wound to keep pressure on it. He's not going to last long if we don't get him out. Eva pushed harder on the accelerator. The map in her head was shifting with every turn. She could feel the pressure of time like a physical weight. Every second gave the enemy more room to close in. Then she saw them. 2 pickup trucks with mounted machine guns barreling toward the intersection ahead. Hold on, she snapped, cutting the wheel and hitting the handbrake. The SUV slid sideways, tires screaming, before she straightened and shot down a parallel street. One of the trucks overshot, crashing into a wall. The other swung to follow. Mason leaned out the window, firing in short bursts. They're not letting go. Eva spotted a construction site ahead. Steel beams, piles of gravel, and a gap in the fence just wide enough for her. She took it full speed, the SUV bouncing wildly over uneven ground. The pursuing truck tried the same but hit a stack of rebar, flipping onto its side in a shriek of metal. The exit on the far side spat them out onto a dimly lit road lined with shuttered shops. Holden's vehicle slid in beside them, his expression visible for the first time in the glow from the dash, tight-lipped, focused. Over comms, his voice came quieter this time. Extraction point 6 minutes out. You lead. It wasn't praise, but it wasn't mockery either. Eva kept her eyes on the road. Copy. They hit the extraction zone with 2 minutes to spare. A deserted freight yard lit only by the pale light of the moon. A waiting cargo truck idled, ready to take the scientist the rest of the way. As Mason and Lila transferred him, Eva stayed in the SUV, scanning the perimeter. Her hands were steady, but she could feel the thrum of adrenaline in her chest. Holden approached her window, resting one hand on the frame. You drive like a maniac. She met his gaze. And yet, here we are, alive. He gave a short nod, just enough to acknowledge it before walking away. Mason slid into the passenger seat again. Not bad, Raines, but that was the easy part. She glanced at him. Easy. His eyes held hers for a beat. Next run, they'll be expecting you. The sound of the cargo truck pulling away faded into the night. Eva rested her hands back on the wheel, the cool leather under her palms. She wasn't thinking about Holden anymore, or even the scientist. She was thinking about the roads ahead, the ones no one else wanted to take, and she knew she'd drive every last one of them if she had to. The air inside the transport plane was a cold, metallic breath, vibrating with a constant roar of engines. Every seat along the fuselage was occupied by black-clad operatives, some quietly checking their weapons, others sitting still with eyes closed, conserving focus. Eva sat between Mason and a weapons crate, the strap of her seatbelt cutting across her chest. The vibration in her bones was the same one she'd felt in convoys before a push into danger. But this time, there was no convoy, no friendly territory. Just her, a vehicle, and whatever waited beyond the drop point. Lila leaned across from the opposite row, her voice raised just enough to be heard over the engines. We insert 30 clicks outside the city. You'll have 2 hours to reach the contact point before the enemy realizes he's gone dark. After that, every road becomes a kill zone. Mason added, The scientist building is here. He slid a photo across to her, grainy, taken from a drone. The building was a squat block of gray concrete, surrounded by burnout cars. You get in, we secure him, you get us out. No air support. Too visible. You'll have to drive him through the worst part of the city to the extraction zone. Eva studied the map in her lap. The streets were a snarl of red ink hazards, checkpoints, ambush zones, collapsed roads. The quickest route was suicide. The safest route was too slow. She was already calculating a third option. Any local support? She asked. Mason's expression was flat. You'll have one joint task force backup vehicle at the rendezvous. They've been in country for 3 weeks. That made her pause. Who's leading them? Before Mason could answer, a voice cut in from the rear of the plane. Captain Jax Holden. Heard you were tagging along. She turned slowly. There he was. Same square jaw, same self-satisfied smirk, but dressed in black combat gear instead of polished fatigues. His eyes met hers with a spark of something she couldn't place. Challenge, disbelief, maybe both. Not tagging along. Eva said evenly, driving point. Holden laughed under his breath. Guess they really are scraping the bottom of the barrel. Lila's eyes flicked between them, but she didn't intervene. The red light over the ramp blinked on. Mason's voice was firm. Gear up. The city smelled like ash and metal. They rolled in under cover of night in 2 black SUVs, headlights off, moving through the skeletal remains of apartment blocks. Shattered windows stared down like hollow eyes, and somewhere in the distance, a single dog barked, then fell silent. Eva gripped the wheel, the hum of the engine low beneath her seat. Mason sat beside her, rifle across his lap. Lila rode in the back, eyes scanning the alleys through night vision goggles. Holden's voice crackled over comms from the second vehicle. Half a click to the target building. Roads look clear. Eva's gut tightened. Too clear. She slowed, easing the SUV around a burned-out bus. The glow from a smoldering trash fire lit the street in a flicker of orange, casting shadows that moved just enough to suggest life. They reached the building without incident. Mason and Lila moved first, slipping inside with two other operatives. Eva stayed in the driver's seat, engine running, scanning the rooftops. A muffled exchange of shouts and gunfire erupted inside. 30 seconds later, Mason emerged with a limping man between him and Lila, the scientist. His face was pale, his right leg wrapped in a bloody bandage. "Go!" Mason barked as they shoved him into the back. Eva dropped the SUV into gear, punching the accelerator. The tires squealed against the cracked asphalt. Behind them, Holden's vehicle followed close, his team firing at shadowy figures that spilled from side streets. Bullets pinged against the SUV's armor plating. Eva took a hard left, then cut through a narrow alley so tight she had to fold the side mirrors in with a quick slap of her palm. Sparks screamed as the SUV brushed concrete. Lila's voice was calm despite the gunfire. "They're moving to block the main road ahead." "Not taking the main road," Eva muttered. She swerved down a side street that looked like it dead-ended. At the last second, she spotted a half-collapsed ramp from a parking garage. Holden's voice came sharp over comms. "Rains, that's a—" But she was already hitting the ramp, the SUV bouncing violently as they climbed, then bursting onto the second floor of the garage. She punched through a flimsy barrier, sending shards of wood scattering into night as they dropped back to street level on the far side. "Death trap," Holden finished, his voice tinged with reluctant surprise. The scientist groaned in the back, clutching his leg. Lila pressed a hand against the wound to keep pressure on it. "He's not going to last long if we don't get him out." Eva pushed harder on the accelerator. The map in her head was shifting with every turn. She could feel the pressure of time like a physical weight. Every second gave the enemy more room to close in. Then she saw them, two pickup trucks with mounted machine guns barreling toward the intersection ahead. "Hold on," she snapped, cutting the wheel and hitting the handbrake. The SUV slid sideways, tires screaming, before she straightened and shot down a parallel street. One of the trucks overshot, crashing into a wall. The other swung to follow. Mason leaned out the window, firing in short bursts. "They're not letting go." Eva spotted a construction site ahead. Steel beams, piles of gravel, and a gap in the fence just wide enough for her. She took it at full speed, the SUV bouncing wildly over uneven ground. The pursuing truck tried the same but hit a stack of rebar, flipping onto its side in a shriek of metal. The exit on the far side spat them out onto a dimly lit road lined with shuttered shops. Holden's vehicle slid in beside them, his expression visible for the first time in the glow from the dash, tight-lipped, focused. Over comms, his voice came quieter this time. "Extraction point 6 minutes out. You lead." It wasn't praise, but it wasn't mockery either. Eva kept her eyes on the road. "Copy." They hit the extraction zone with 2 minutes to spare, a deserted freight yard lit only by the pale light of the moon. A waiting cargo truck idled, ready to take the scientist the rest of the way. As Mason and Lila transferred him, Eva stayed in the SUV, scanning the perimeter. Her hands were steady, but she could feel the thrum of adrenaline in her chest. Holden approached her window, resting one hand on the frame. "You drive like a maniac." She met his gaze. "And yet, here we are, alive." He gave a short nod, just enough to acknowledge it before walking away. Mason slid into the passenger seat again. "Not bad, Rains, but that was the easy part." She glanced at him. "Easy." His eyes held hers for a beat. "Next run, they'll be expecting you." The sound of the cargo truck pulling away faded into the night. Eva rested her hands back on the wheel, the cool leather under her palms. She wasn't thinking about Holden anymore, or even the scientists. She was thinking about the roads ahead, the ones no one else wanted to take, and she knew she'd drive every last one of them if she had to. The helicopter's rotors were still thundering in Eva's ears long after it had vanished into the black sky. The fortified outpost was quieter than it should have been, too quiet, considering they'd just barely escaped an ambush. The place smelled of diesel, dust, and something sharper, tension. She stood by the SUV, the heat still radiating from its engine, scanning the perimeter. Holden's team was unloading ammo crates from their vehicle, his voice low, but clipped as he barked orders. Lila was already in the comms tent, speaking in rapid, hushed tones to someone far above their pay grade. Mason hadn't said a word since they landed. That silence was heavier than the firefight they'd just come through. When Mason finally turned to her, there was no satisfaction in his expression, just calculation. "We need to talk." Eva crossed her arms. "About what? The part where we were almost blown apart twice in the last hour, or the part where the enemy seemed to know exactly where we'd be?" "Both," Mason said, "and the fact that it's not coincidence." Holden, overhearing, stepped closer. "What's your point?" "My point," Mason said evenly, "is that we have a leak, and it's inside our operation." Holden's jaw flexed. "You accusing one of my men?" "I'm saying someone is feeding them intel. Could be your men. Could be ours." Mason's gaze slid briefly to Lila's direction, then back. "Could be anyone." Eva's eyes narrowed. "You've been thinking this since the minefield, haven't you?" Mason gave a slight nod. "Too many hits in too little time. That's not luck." Lila emerged from the tent just then, face unreadable. HQ's rerouting the scientists to a deep safe house. No further details given. Her gaze flicked to Mason, then to Eva. "They want us ready to move again in 4 hours." "For hours?" Holden barked. "We've been running nonstop since insertion. My people need rest." "They'll rest in the vehicles," Lila said flatly. "The clock's not in our favor." The way she said it, cold, precise, made something in Eva's gut tighten. She had no proof, but suspicion was starting to coil in her mind like a snake. They reloaded the SUVs in silence. The night air bit at Eva's skin, and the tension among the teams was thick enough to taste. Holden avoided looking at her, but she could feel his gaze when he thought she wasn't noticing. As they pulled out of the outpost, Eva took point again. The roads were empty except for the occasional burning barrel or wandering dog. The moon hung low and pale over the city's jagged silhouette. Mason's voice broke the quiet. "If we have a leak, they'll hit us again. Question is when and how." Eva kept her eyes forward. "If you think Lila—" "I didn't say that. But you're thinking it." Mason was silent for a moment. "I trust skill. Trusting people? That's harder." They drove another 10 minutes before Holden's voice came over comms. "Rains, you're drifting east of the route." "Intentionally," she said. "If they're tracking us, they'll expect a straight line. We're going to ghost them for a while." Holden didn't respond, but she noticed his vehicle didn't protest a turn. The detour took them through the skeletal remains of an industrial zone. Warehouses stood hollowed out, their roofs caved, their walls tagged with layers of spray paint. Rusted cranes leaned over the road like dying beasts. It was quiet enough that Eva could hear the ticking of the SUV's dashboard clock. Then the quiet cracked, not with gunfire, but with static on the comms. "Loose flank copy?" The voice was faint, but she recognized it. One of Holden's men. Mason's eyes met hers. "That transmission wasn't on our secure channel." Before she could answer, a flare arced into the sky ahead, red, bright, and deliberate. Her stomach dropped. Ambush! The first explosion hit behind them, flipping the rear guard vehicle in a spray of dirt and fire. Holden's voice shouted over comms. "Contact! Rear quadrant." Eva slammed the SUV into a tight turn down a side street, the tires screaming. She threaded between collapsed scaffolding and a half-toppled streetlight, the world narrowing to headlights and shadow. Automatic fire stitched the air above the roof. Sparks flew from a ricochet against the hood. Mason fired out the passenger side, returning in short, sharp bursts. "They're hurting us." "Not if I can help it," Eva muttered. She took the next left hard, the SUV's frame groaning. A narrow gap between two buildings appeared, barely wide enough for the mirrors. She didn't slow. Concrete scraped metal as they burst into another alley and straight into a waiting pickup truck with a mounted gun. Eva didn't hesitate. She floored it. The SUV slammed into the truck's front corner, spinning it out of position. The gunner tumbled from the bed. They powered through, Holden's remaining vehicle behind them, the sound of his rifle joining Mason's. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of the city. The road here was little more than dirt and broken asphalt, winding into scrubland. Holden pulled up alongside, his face hard in the dim light. We lost 2 men, and that wasn't just bad luck. Eva met his eyes. No, someone selling our movements. Lila spoke from the back seat, her voice calm in a way that made Eva's skin crawl. We can speculate all night, or we can make it to the safe house alive. Pick one. Holden bristled. You're awfully calm for someone who's been shot at twice in an hour. Her eyes flashed. Calm keeps you alive. Eva cut in before the argument could explode. Enough. We keep moving, but off-road. If they've got our routes, we go where there aren't any. The terrain turned rough fast. Uneven ground, dry creek beds, rocks big enough to snap an axle. The SUV jolted and shuddered with each impact, the headlights cutting wild paths through the dark. They crested a ridge, and Eva caught sight of movement below, a convoy of 3 vehicles, moving fast in the same general direction. They're sweeping, Mason said. Eva's mind raced. If she stayed the course, they'd cross paths in minutes. She turned sharply down a ravine, the incline steep enough to make the tires slip. Loose dirt cascaded in their wake. The SUV bottomed out hard before finding traction again. Branches clawed at the sides as they fought through brush. The enemy convoy's lights disappeared behind the ridge. They emerged onto a dirt track barely visible in the moonlight. Ahead, a weathered wooden bridge stretched over a narrow gorge. Think it'll hold? Mason asked. Eva's mouth twitched. We're about to find out. The bridge groaned under their weight, boards popping beneath the tires. Halfway across, a gunshot rang out from the opposite side. Splinters burst from the railing. Go, go, go. Mason barked. Eva punched the accelerator. They hit the far side in a lurch, the SUV's suspension groaning. She didn't look back. An hour later, the safe house appeared, a squat stone building tucked against a hillside, dark except for a single slit of light under the door. They parked in silence. Mason went ahead to sweep the perimeter. Holden stayed near the vehicles, his posture tense. Eva started toward the door, but Lila's voice stopped her. Eva. She turned. Lila's eyes were steady, her tone even. Don't let suspicion cloud your judgment. It'll get you killed. Eva held her gaze for a long moment. Or it'll keep me alive. She stepped inside. The safe house smelled of stale air and dust. Inside, Mesa was already pulling blackout curtains over the lone window. The scientist sat in a corner, pale and silent, his leg bandaged more tightly now. Eva sank into a chair, feeling the weight of the night pressed down on her shoulders. Her mind replayed every moment. The flare, the perfect timing of the ambush, the missing voices on secure channels. Someone here was a leak. She didn't know who yet, but she knew one thing for certain. Next time, the enemy wouldn't just be waiting for them. They'd be ready to finish it, and she'd be ready for them. The safe house didn't feel safe. It was the way the walls seemed too thin, the floorboards too loud, the silence too absolute. Eva sat in the corner of the dimly lit main room, one knee up, hands resting loosely over it. She tried to sleep, but her mind kept replaying the convoy's destruction, the flare in the city, the flare in the minefield. She wasn't just tired. She was coiled like a spring wound, so tight it hummed. Mason was at the table, cleaning his rifle with a precision that looked almost meditative. Holden was near the door, pacing in short lines, eyes scanning the dark outside. Lila leaned against the wall, her gaze distant but calculating. The scientist was asleep in the corner, his head tipped back, his breathing shallow. It was Mason who broke the quiet. We have one window to move. We miss it, and we lose him for good. Holden stopped pacing. Meaning, Mason said. The enemy's pulling forces west for a push. The east corridor is open, but only for maybe 30 minutes before they swing back. We get to the secondary extraction point before then. We're home free. And if we don't, Eva asked. Mason's eyes met hers. Then we don't make it at all. They rolled out 10 minutes later, the scientist in the back seat, Mason riding shotgun, Holden's vehicle behind them. The sky was a dull gray now, the horizon just beginning to hint at dawn. The route east took them through a valley flanked by rocky ridges. It was beautiful in a way, the jagged silhouettes against the pale sky, but Eva didn't trust beauty in places like this. It always hid something sharp. Her instincts were right. Halfway through the valley, the comms crackled, not with voices, but with interference. A low hiss, then a burst of static. "They're jamming us," Mason said. "Which means," Eva replied, "they're close." She pushed the accelerator, the SUV's engine growling as they wound to the narrow pass. Rocks jutted close enough to scrape the mirrors. Holden's voice came faintly through the static. Movement ridge. Eva's eyes snapped up. Dark shapes were pacing them along the ridgeline. 3, maybe 4 trucks. Their silhouettes broke briefly against a lightning sky, and then the first muzzle flash bloomed. The round hit the dirt just ahead, spraying gravel against the windshield. "Ambush!" Mason barked. Eva swerved, tires skidding against loose rock, then straightened out, pushing for more speed. The road ahead curved sharply, hugging the cliff's edge. "Hold on," she warned. She took the corner at speed, the SUV's weight leaning dangerously toward the drop. The scientist let out a strange sound in the back, clutching the door handle. Behind them, one of the ridge trucks found a way down, cutting onto the road in a spray of dust. "They're trying to box us in," Mason said. "Not if I get there first," Eva muttered. A break in the ridge appeared ahead, a slope of loose gravel leading to the valley floor. It wasn't a road, not by any stretch, but it was an exit. She cut the wheel hard, the SUV fishtailing before dropping onto the slope. Gravel roared beneath the tires, dust choking the air. Holden followed without hesitation, his vehicle sliding in their wake. At the bottom, the ground flattened into a dry riverbed. Wide, open, nowhere to hide. And there, at the far end, a line of enemy vehicles was fanning out to block it. "Suggestions?" she asked. Mason's voice was calm. "Straight through." Eva gave a humorless laugh. "Thought you'd say that." She shifted into a higher gear, engine screaming as they closed the distance. Bullets sparked against the hood, the windshield spiderwebbing in the upper corner. 50 meters. She spotted a gap, narrow, between a truck and a boulder. She angled for it, tires biting into the sand. 30 meters. A gunner stood up in the bed of the truck, swinging his weapon toward them. 10 meters. Eva yanked the wheel, slamming into the truck's fender. Metal screamed, the gap widening just enough for the SUV to squeeze through. She felt the brush of rock against the side, the jolt as they broke past the blockade. Holden's vehicle followed, clipping the truck and sending it spinning. The victory was brief. Up ahead, the riverbed narrowed into a canyon, and the sound of engines was closing in from behind. "They're hurting us again," Mason said. Eva's eyes scanned the canyon walls, mind working in overdrive. The terrain was treacherous, jagged stone, patches of loose scree. But there was one possibility. "Seatbelts," she warned. Without waiting for an answer, she veered toward the canyon wall, driving up the angled slope like it was a ramp. The SUV tilted, the right side tires scraping rock before gravity tried to pull them back down. She fought it, gunning the engine until they reached a narrow ledge halfway up the wall. The path was barely wider than the vehicle, but it curved around a canyon bend, out of sight from the main route. "Please tell me this reconnects," Mason said. "Not sure yet," Eva replied. They followed the ledge for what felt like forever, the drop yawning on one side, the rock face inches from the other. Finally, it sloped downward, spitting them out onto a gravel track. The GPS blinked back to life. Mason's face broke into the smallest hint of relief. 5 clicks to extraction. The final stretch should have been easy. It wasn't. As they crested a hill, Eva saw them. 2 armored cars blocking the road, positioned nose to nose to create a wall of steel. "Looks like they were expecting us after all," Mason said grimly. Holden's voice came over comms, clearer now. "Rains, you take point." "I'll cover." She didn't answer, just tightened her grip on the wheel. The armored cars were too heavy to ram head-on. But there was another way. She spotted a low berm to the right, pile high with sand and loose stone. If she hit it fast enough, She could ride up and over the rear of the first armored car before it could reposition. It was insane. She did it anyway. The SUV roared up the berm, the suspension slamming hard as they caught air, the front tires landing on the car's trunk before bouncing off onto the road beyond. The rear bumper scraped metal with a teeth-rattling scream, but they were through. Holden's vehicle plowed into the gap behind her, his gunner firing a full sweep to keep heads down. The extraction site came into view, a wide, open plateau where a tilt-rotor aircraft sat idling, its rotor spinning slow and steady. Eva slowed only enough to skid to a stop near the ramp. Mason was out first, helping the scientist toward the waiting crew. Lila followed, glancing once over her shoulder before disappearing into the aircraft. Holden walked up to her window, his expression unreadable. "You pulled it off." She raised an eyebrow. "Sound surprised." "I am," he admitted, then added, "But I shouldn't be." It wasn't praise exactly, but it wasn't mockery either. The aircraft's engines whined louder, the pitch climbing. Mason leaned out from the ramp. "Rains, you coming?" She looked past him to the plateau's edge and saw dust plumes rising in the distance. The enemy wasn't done yet. Eva tightened her grip on the wheel. "Get him out. I'll make sure you get the time." Holden's head snapped toward her. "That's suicide." "Only if I'm bad at my job," she said. The last thing she heard before pulling away was the whine of the tilt rotor lifting into the sky. Then it was just her, the road, and the growing roar of engines behind her. She didn't plan on dying here. She planned on making them remember her. The plateau fell way behind her as Eva gunned the engine, the tilt rotor's shadow shrinking against the pale dawn sky. Ahead, the road was nothing but a winding ribbon of dirt and fractured asphalt cutting through scrub and low rock. Behind her, the enemy convoy was closing fast, dust plumes churning in the first light of morning. She could make out the silhouettes. For vehicles, maybe 5, spread wide to box her in. Her hands were steady on the wheel, heart rate even. She'd been in worse. But not alone. A burst of gunfire tore through the quiet, rounds sparking off the SUV's rear quarter panel. She didn't flinch. Instead, she scanned the terrain, low ridges to the left, a dried riverbed to the right. The road ahead dipped into a shallow basin. If she timed it right, she could use it. She hit the basin at speed, then yanked the wheel hard, dropping the SUV into the riverbed. The tires bit into the packed dirt, throwing up a wall of dust behind her. The enemy followed, engines howling. Mason's voice came faintly over the comms, cutting through static. "Status." She kept her eyes forward, her voice calm. "By me 3 minutes, and I'll be there." No answer, just the hiss of interference. The riverbed twisted, narrowing between 2 steep embankments. It was a natural choke point, and the enemy used it when the lead trucks pulled ahead and skidded sideways, blocking the path. Eva didn't brake. She cut the wheel at the last second, slamming the SUV into the truck's flank. The impact was bone-jarring, metal screaming as the truck spun just enough for her to squeeze past. She caught a glimpse of the driver's wide-eyed shock before she was gone. More fire erupted from behind. A round punched through the rear window, spraying glass across the back seat. She dropped lower, keeping the wheel straight. The riverbed climbed back toward open ground, and that's when she saw it. Ahead, the riverbed split. One path narrow and twisting, the other wide and open but exposed. They'd expect her to take the open one. She took the narrow. Branches scraped the roof, rocks hammered the undercarriage. But she kept going. The enemy's engines faded slightly, the larger vehicles struggling to follow. When she burst back on the road, she saw the plateau's edge ahead, the last high ground before the flat expanse where the tilt rotor had lifted off. Her comm crackled again, clearer this time. Mason's voice was tight. "We're airborne. Where are you?" "Almost there," she said. A pause. Then, "Holden's coming to meet you." She didn't have time to ask what that meant before she saw it. Another black SUV cresting the hill ahead, Holden at the wheel. He swung in behind her without hesitation, his vehicle slipping into formation like they'd been running together for years. "You've got company," he said over comms. "I notice." They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. The enemy convoy reappeared over the ridge behind them, fanned wide. Holden dropped back slightly, his gunner leaning out to pour fire into the lead vehicle. It swerved, overcorrected, and rolled in a cloud of dust. Eva pushed the accelerator harder, the engine's roar matching the pounding in her chest. The extraction point wasn't the plateau anymore. It was a stretch of cracked highway where the tilt rotor could land for barely 30 seconds. Mason had given her the coordinates. She had to make it. The last obstacle came in the form of a barricade across the highway, abandoned cars, concrete slabs, and steel cables strung between. Holden's voice was sharp. "You can't punch that." Eva scanned it in a heartbeat. "No, but I can thread it." She angled for the smallest gap, cutting so close to the concrete that the SUV's side mirror sheared off with a screech. The steel cable snapped against the hood, leaving a gouge but not enough to stop her. Holden followed, his larger vehicle scraping hard but making it through. Behind them, the enemy slammed into the barricade. 2 vehicles piled up, blocking the others. They were clear. The highway stretched ahead, straight and flat, the heat shimmer of early sun already starting to rise from the asphalt. In the distance, a dark speck grew larger, the tilt rotor dropping from the sky like a hawk. Eva didn't slow. The aircraft's rotor spun faster, the wash kicking up dust and debris in wide arcs. She skidded to a stop just short of the ramp. Mason was there, waving her in, his face tight with urgency. "Move!" he shouted over the rotor noise. She stepped out, the wind from the blades tearing at her hair and clothes. Holden climbed out his vehicle, too, his team fanning around to cover them. Mason clapped a hand on her shoulder, hard enough to jolt her. "Didn't think you'd make it." She smirked faintly. "That makes one of us." They loaded her into the aircraft. The ramp began to close even before she'd fully sat down. Through the narrowing gap, she saw the enemy convoy crest a far hill. Too late. The tilt rotor lifted, the ground falling away. The adrenaline crash hit her in waves. Her hands were still steady, but her breathing came deeper now, each inhale burning with a tang of rotor exhaust. Across from her, Holden watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You bought us time we didn't have," he said. "I misjudged you." She held his gaze. "You're not the first." He gave a single nod, not defensive, not dismissive, just acknowledgement. "Won't happen again." Lila was watching too, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. But Eva thought she saw the smallest flicker of something there. Maybe respect, maybe just calculation. They landed hours later at a secure base. The scientist was whisked away by handlers in plain clothes. Mason and Lila disappeared into a debriefing room with locked doors. Holden walked off to see to his men. Eva stayed by the tilt rotor, watching the dust settle where its blades had churned the ground. She thought about the motor pool, about Holden's smirk when he called her just a chauffeur, about every sideways look, every underestimation. Footsteps approached. "Mason, they're adding your name to a list," he said. "What kind of list?" "The kind where your phone rings at 2 a.m. and you don't get to say no." Eva gave a dry laugh. "Sounds like a promotion." "It's more than that," Mason said. "It's trust. Earned, not given." She didn't answer right away. The hum of base activity filled the pause. Engine starting, distant shouts, the metallic clang of gear being moved. Finally, she said, "Guess I stayed in my lane after all." Mason's mouth curved just slightly. "Only difference is, your lane's anywhere you can drive through." Later, back at the motor pool, it was almost surreal. Same cracked pavement, same line of vehicles, same soldiers milling around, checking gear. Only now, when she stepped out of her SUV, the conversations quieted. Heads turned. Holden was there too, leaning against a Humvee. He straightened as she approached. In front of everyone, he held out his hand. "You're the best damn driver I've ever seen," he said. She shook his hand, grip firm. "Took you long enough." The laughter that followed wasn't mocking this time. It was real. That night, Eva sat in her quarters, the hum of the bass faint through the walls. Her phone, the new, unmarked one Mason had handed her, lay on the desk. She knew it would ring. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but it would. And when it did, she'd answer. because she wasn't just a military driver anymore. She was the one they called when survival wasn't optional.